We have returning the program Gary Johnston, Libertarian candidate for president. Last time around, he was a Republican presidential candidate, now running on the Libertarian Party line, as well as a former governor of New Mexico.
On Gingrich. I mean, he's kind of the example of the root of all evil, which are politicians that leave office and then cash in what it is they've done.
Yeah, right.
And the fact that his firm has taken in millions of dollars worth of consulting fees. I mean, come on, this is what's wrong with the system. I also have one issue with Gingrich. You know, in 1997... yes, it is. And
you're his best friend.
In 1997, he proposed the death penalty for possession of marijuana in excess of 2 ounces with intent to distribute it.
Is that true?
Oh,
yes, from overseas, yes. And when asked about his own marijuana use, this is in 1997, when asked about his own marijuana use, he said, well, when I did it, it was cool. But basically, when I did it, it was cool. But now, when I did it, it was cool. It was against the law. But now it's against the law, and it's morally wrong. So the first 30 people that we put these are his statements. The first 30 people we put to death for marijuana intent to distribute, that will dry up marijuana use in this country.
You have just identified exactly why everybody in the White House could not be pulling more for Newt Gingrich, which is that
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, he could not have higher he has very high unfavorables, but also. You just start going through the Newt Gingrich book of things he said. Yeah. Gary Johnston, you're running for president on the Libertarian Party line. You're a Republican governor. I'm curious if you would like to step to the plate to defend a capital gains rate of 15% and a structure of rates that is in effect regressive as you get up towards the top of the scale.
No. So I'm the lone voice. I was the lone voice out there. I get to carry this forward now as a message running as a Libertarian candidate for president. But I share in the outrage of the Tea Party, which is we need to slash spending. But I also share in the outrage of Occupy Wall Street, which is this country doles it out unfairly. This is not a level playing field at all. It's up for sale. And you talked about it, the income defense industry. That's what exists in Washington right now. So I am advocating the fair tax. I would love for those watching this show to check it out, fairtax.org. But I think it is, as the name implies. It does away with all federal tax and replaces it with a 23% federal consumption tax, which by all calculations will be cost neutral over a very short amount of time. And it is, as the name implies, it's fair. The more money you make, the more fair tax you'll pay.
Well, yeah, David, weigh in.
That is, I got to tell you, Governor, you are so badly informed on this, it's astonishing. First of all, if we go to this tax, everything you have, you're going to have to have a receipt for if we're going to have an enforcement mechanism. Secondly,
you're going to pay for it at the point of purchase.
Can I finish?
Well, you really slanderous statements to start with.
Well,
so, okay.
Let me try to educate you, Governor.
Go ahead and finish, David, and then we'll hear from you, Gary.
You think there won't be black markets? There'll be enormous black markets.
Sure, there'll be black markets.
Can I address
this as we go?
Wait.
Let me
lay out your case against it, and then Mr. Johnson will weigh in. You upgraded to Mr. Johnson for my last.
There is a way to have a consumption tax that works. It's a subtraction method value-added tax because every party along the way has an interest in collecting the tax and ultimately getting it to the government, and it helps with exports. But the retail sales system we have now is terribly porous. Lots of things are not taxed. And I am absolutely certain it will lead to pressure because of black market marketing to have all transactions done digitally, no cash. Then your privacy goes away. Everybody, your litigants, an estranged spouse can figure out where you were, when you were, what you paid.
Gary, would you like to just respond?
Just to the black market comment. First of all, there's black market that goes on today, but when you take in your money in the black market, you've escaped it effectively. You take in your money in the black market when it comes to the fair tax, you're going to have to turn around and consume with those dollars. So I'm going to argue that, in fact, it will be subject to the fair tax.
We're talking about inequality, the tax system, whether the tax system exacerbates that inequality or mitigates it. Gary Johnston is an advocate of what he calls a fair tax, which is a 23% flat tax on consumption. David K. Johnston's on the line, Pulitzer Prize-winning tax reporter. Gary, I want to give you a chance to respond to the point that Melissa made, which I think is the point that we make on the progressive side all the time about consumption taxes, which is that they are progressive, they are regressive in the way that you're suggesting.
Well, one thing that David pointed out, too, is that this will make American exports much more competitive. Arguably, the fair tax is cost neutral. In other words, the Coca-Cola that sells for $1 today has embedded tax that isn't evident to the tune of about 23%. You take that away, you implement the fair tax, arguably the Coke doesn't sell for $1 anymore. It'll sell for 80 cents and it'll be subject to a 23% tax. But it's not regressive, I'm going to argue, from the standpoint that it issues everyone in the country a prebate check. So we all get $200 a month, $2,400 a year, which allows all of us to pay for the fair tax up to the point of the poverty level. That's the escape from that criticism. So it also promotes savings, and something that we really do need in this country if we're going to...
Yeah, let me just clarify for people, because this is the standard way that people amend a pure flat tax to make it not completely regressive, right? Which is that basically you're not taxed on the poorest of the poor, up to the poverty line, aren't taxed at all. They're exempted, essentially. There's a prebate check. There's just so that people are tracking this.
We all get that check, though. We all do.
Right, but what it means is that the people who are making very, very little money, at the very bottom, there's a little bit of progressivity because the poorest of the poor are not paying taxes. David K. Johnston, I want you to give you a chance to respond.
Well, you know, the most conservative idea in Western civilization is progressive taxation in the classic meaning of conservative, because it's 2,500 years old, and it was the invention of the moral principle that the greater your gain enabled by the society you live in, because there is no wealth without taxes and a society. Taxes are the foundation of all private wealth. That's what gave birth to democracy in ancient Athens.
David K. Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning tax reporter. Your book, the two books that you've written on taxes are two of the best I've read. Certainly the best tax books I've ever read. I want to ask you a question about the multi-million-dollar IRA that Mitt Romney is currently holding, and what's up with that after this break.
I can explain that.
All right, I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I keep blowing through it every week, week in, week out. This week we're finally doing it. We asked everyone here to come in prepared to share the best thing they've read this week. The best thing I read this week was an essay in Rolling Stone by my friend Rick Perlstein, who is one of the finest nonfiction writers out there. Amazing histories, a historian of the modern American right. He wrote a great piece in Rolling Stone about the relationship between Mitt Romney and his father, what Mitt Romney learned from his dad, and it's a sort of psychohistory in which he advances the thesis that his Mitt Romney's father, George Romney, who was a head of American Motor Corporation and governor of Michigan, ran for president and lost. He lost against Nixon while being this sort of authentic truth teller, and that the lesson that Romney learned from that defeat was that authentic truth tellers get destroyed in politics, and inauthentic, calculating, maniacs like Richard Nixon are the ones who are rewarded. So I thought it was just a fascinating piece you check out. Gary Johnston, what's the best thing you read this week?
Well, so Hellhound on his trail, Hampton sides, on the Martin Luther King assassination, which I thought was fascinating.
It tracks James Earl Ray as he prepares to kill Martin Luther King.
Exactly. So, and the politics that went behind that, the fact that he was a George Wallace supporter in California. I mean, all these things were really interesting. Martin Luther King, what was happening during that time, the talks that he was giving, just how, if you will, inflammatory it was, and how the tensions were at such a heightened level. I mean, it was just really interesting.
I am pleased that the attitude is sort of mellowed up here, because the Republicans, unfortunately, have been on the wrong side of this issue. And this is a good example on why it's good to have somebody that can look at civil liberties and work with coalitions and bring people together.
Those are the some of the Republican candidates talking about the SOPA and PIPA legislation, and what's interesting about one of the interesting parts of the legislation is the way it confounds every conceivable way of thinking about politics in terms of ideological coalitions. I mean, it just makes no sense. Ron Paul and Newt Gingrich are on the same side of Barack Obama in this one. The president and the White House issuing this statement on SOPA: any effort to combat online piracy must guard against the risk of online censorship of lawful activity and must not inhibit innovation by our dynamic businesses, large and small. And here's and part of the reason I think you have a scrambling of general ideological coalitions is because you have these two interests fighting each other. Here's an anonymous person from one of those interests, an unnamed movie studio chief, talking about the bill. I love this. God knows how much money we've given to Obama and the Democrats, and yet they're not supporting our interests. There's been no greater supporters of him than we've been from the first day and the first fundraisers continuing until he was elected. We all were pleased. At its heart, institutionally, Hollywood supports the Democrats. Now we need the administration to support us. Gary Johnston, you wanted to weigh in on this.
Well, I wanted to make a plug here for myself. The ACLU issued a report a couple of weeks ago on gave every presidential candidate a grade on civil liberties. And guess who got the highest grade?
I don't know.
Including Obama and Ron Paul. And yeah, I was clearly higher up. So as governor of New Mexico, I may have vetoed more bills than the other 49 governors in the country combined. I vetoed 750 bills because of the unintended consequence that I saw in so much legislation that got labeled as telecommunications competitive act. You know, let's bring competition to telecommunications. Well, the fact is, it did anything but bring competition to telecommunications. So I vetoed the bill. There's nothing about the internet that the government needs to fix.
Well, here, let me say this. When you make that argument, then you make me want to, then you push me to the other side. Because when people make the argument against SOPA and PIPA in those terms, and people have, as essentially a libertarian argument about the unintended consequences of regulation, I've heard that argument applied in all sorts of circumstances in which I want there to be regulation. So then I start to get, am I on the wrong side of this issue?
Now, I have a real issue with collective bargaining for public employees. I mean, where are the taxpayers' interests at that table if the union has paid for the politicians sitting at that table doing those collective bargaining agreements? I just don't think that it's right. I don't think it's fair at all to taxpayers. And I just have a fundamental difference when it comes to the unions, and that is the union sends me two people. The best worker I've ever had, the worst worker I've ever had. I can't reward the best. I can't get rid of the worst. I have to pay them both the same. That's the only issue that I have.
You want to find out what my guests know that they didn't know when the week began? We will start with you, Gary Johnston, former governor of New Mexico, current presidential candidate of the Libertarian Party. What do you now know?
Well, I guess it's just becoming more and more evident to me that people really don't want to acknowledge the problems that are really out there. You talk about a balance. I believe that we need to balance the federal budget. Well, that means cutting 43% from Medicare, and of course, there's an outrage over that. But what people really don't understand, in my opinion, is that if we don't do this, we're going to find ourselves with nothing. So I'm really surprised, something that I really wasn't expecting, that the Republican candidates are down to 4 in South Carolina, and I'm rooting for Ron Paul. But I'm surprised to see the reaction to Ron Paul when he talks about balancing the federal budget and the cuts that need to go along with military spending, and the negative reaction by South Carolinians on that issue. That's a surprise to me. I mean, in a conservative state, in a state that I think, in any state where people aren't able to recognize that this is across the board, that this needs to take place.
You're saying
for everything.
Military spending as well.
Military spending. Well, it's welfare spending and it's warfare spending. I mean, it's both. But to not acknowledge that in a state like South Carolina, I'm surprised.